while A Journey Back to the Past gives us easily one of the boys' most diabolical and deadly episodes yet. Hey guys, it's Kevin here, my review for The Boys, Season 4, Episode 4, Wisdom of the Ages, and holy shit, this was a crazy episode, and there really is a lot to talk about here. I know that people were kind of unsure where the season was going after the first 3 episodes, but like I said, things were, pacing themselves out. I knew that things were going to ratchet up, and if this episode is any indication of where this season is heading, I'm very excited to see how these last 3 episodes play out. Already, we only have 4 episodes left of this season, which is crazy. These seasons always go by so incredibly fast, but we're going to go ahead and just jump into it. There's a lot to talk about in this one. I will say right off the bat, there are points where this episode could have been the best of the season, but there are a couple things that do bring it down, but it doesn't take away from the fact that this is easily some of the most memorable and I think most introspective, violent moments this show has really ever given us. I mean, you want to talk about The Boys at its most unhinged, look no further than this episode, and I mean, there's so much to talk about, there's so much that is going down here. Things still are feeling, I will say, things are starting to feel a bit overstuffed, especially in this episode, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I really loved a lot of what went down here, and we're just going to go ahead and get into it right now. Now, unlike the previous 3 episodes where I was talking about the stuff that happened with the boys and then talking about the stuff with the 7, I don't think I can really do that in this one because most of the episode, there isn't a lot for the rest of the 7 to do that isn't Homelander, and then for the boys, there isn't a lot going on that isn't with Annie and Huey, so I'm not really going to do it that way. I'm going to talk about most important to least important and just kind of go from there. I think that's probably the best way to go about it for this episode. Not just because there's a lot of overlap, but there's also a lot of separation. So we're just going to go ahead and dive right into it. Now, of course, I think we have to go ahead and just start off with easily the most memorable stuff in this entire episode. I think when we look back on this episode, years from now when The Boys has ended and things like that, this will absolutely be known as the episode where Homelander fully loses his humanity because holy shit, I mean, look, we have seen this guy do some truly just monstrous shit, whether it's not save people in a plane crash, whether it is, literally date a Nazi, whether it is, murder the friend of Annie and in cold blood and things like that, whether it's kill a guy in broad daylight, but this has to be the most unhinged and the most demented version of this character we have ever seen yet. And I think we knew that this was going to be a really rough episode in terms of everything we get with Homelander, but I mean, I truly was not prepared for just how deranged this episode ended up being for him, but also I think a very impressive one. I mean, right off the bat, I gotta commend Antony Starr here, who every time I feel like this guy has shown me all he can do with this character, he brings out a new side to him that I haven't seen before. I think he does that in this episode. What he does so well with Homelander is get us to really understand what he has been through and all of the terrible shit, all of the anguish, the taunting that he went through, and kind of what turned him into a monster, but also seeing it from the perspective of someone who is this psychopath, who has no morals, who is trying to completely shed his humanity. You really feel that in this episode. This is him giving into his worst instincts and not holding back in any possible way. We have seen instances where Homelander does hold back, and this episode, I mean, this is exactly the Homelander that we love. He is so unpredictable, so frightening from pretty much every scene, but also there is this sense where we kind of do understand what he's doing, and it is kind of this, like, twisted fantasy of sorts. Like, if you could get revenge on the people that bullied you or taunted you or did all, traumatized you as a child, what would you do? I'm sure, but the thing is, none of us would go to these extremes. None of us would go to the places that he goes to in this episode, but because he's Homelander, he has no real sort of remorse. He has no sort of, he has no care. He doesn't really seem to hold back in any way, and he has no restraint, and we really see that in this episode. I mean, right from the beginning, when he goes into that lab and he is just immediately going to the staff and letting them know, like, that he's here to get revenge, you can tell they're not taking him seriously. I mean, yes, they know what they have created, but even at that, they are so incredibly ambivalent to everything that he's doing. You kind of wonder what exactly their relationship to him was. And I think something that is really cool about this show actually is all of this is done without the use of any flashbacks. Instead, it is entirely reliant upon Starr's delivery, understanding what he went through, what kind of branded him into becoming the monster that they see before them. And I think they did a smart thing too, because I don't know if you know this, but like on the Twitter account, either for VOT or for like The Boys official, they released like a deleted scene from season 1 that they were going to do of Homelander and I believe this woman that was in the labs with him, and he seemed like, he was getting close to her and he was trying to give her a hug and he ended up suffocating her and things like that. And while that scene is extremely effective and gets us to really understand Homelander's deranged mindset and just why he is the way he is, I think it's better off that they did cut it, because I think, again, not having flashbacks in this episode, but instead having Homelander recount things made it that much more impactful. It got us to really understand just how he's processed things and how he has, how things have gone up to this point, and sort of the anger that he's felt throughout this entire show, and him finally getting to, get his retribution in a sense, I think was far more satisfying than if they would have like peppered flashbacks throughout the show. Normally, that's what I would have preferred, but this is one of those instances where I think the absence of it actually elevated I think actually elevated the show in terms of tension, in terms of unpredictability, in terms of graphicness. I think it really honestly did end up helping the show more than anything. So again, I think this is one of the rare cases where the fact that they didn't include these flashbacks actually did the show a lot of good. I think they did it for a couple of reasons. One, it's more effective. Two, I mean, there's just the stuff that Homelander talks about in this episode that he went through, I don't think is something that we need to see. I think we can understand the pain. I think we can understand the agony that he's in. But also just show how everything he did, he is taking in a literal sort of sense, and he is making them live what he went through. And you can just see from the beginning, like I said, he's not holding back in any way. He is fully there to just get his revenge. And the way this all went down was so, I don't want to say glorious, but just so incredibly grotesque and so incredibly scary to watch. I mean, The Boys there have been moments that have, been very suspenseful. There have been moments that have been very frightening, but this is probably the most terrifying that Homelander really has ever been. I mean, right from the first time we see him, with the staff, and he's talking to this guy, Robert, who he's asking to, play a game of paper football, you're wondering what his angle is all about and what he really is trying to do. And, you're kind of wondering, like, you can see the gears in his head turning, but you're not entirely sure what this is leading to. But because it's Homelander, it's going to be something really nasty. It's going to be something that is really fucked up, and it's going to be something that really ends up disturbing you, because that's what this guy is all about. But yet they do such a great job of also getting us to understand, in a sense, where he's coming from. You understand why he's taking revenge on these people, because they had so little remorse for him, so he has no real care for them. And in that sense, you can understand it. But again, because it's Homelander, it is so much more terrifying to watch when he's talking to Robert, and eventually we get that reveal of him, carelessly playing paper football while they essentially tortured Homelander in an oven because they wanted to see if his skin would burn. They were so intent to see, treating him like this science experiment of sorts, if he would burn in the way humans do. They didn't stop to think whether or not it was actually hurting him, whether or not he was actually in pain. And I think that Starr just does a really great job of showing all this repressed pain that he went through. I think that, again, Starr just does a really great job of walking that fine line between someone who's in pain, between someone who's trying to now permanently get rid of any pain and any feelings they had whatsoever. And the moment where he tortures Robert in that oven and burns him alive and says that he forgives him, I mean, that just perfectly demonstrated what this was going to be, him going on this crusade of sorts and not holding back in any way. And that scene alone was utterly terrifying. But then you get to the Marty of it all, when he's telling Marty to literally jerk off in front of everybody, and Marty isn't sure if he's going to do it, and then he has him do it, and Marty isn't successful, he isn't able to finish, and you find out again, what I like about all of the things that Homelander's making them do again is them kind of having to go through the same humiliation, the same pain that he did. We find out that Homelander was caught jerking off at one point, and Marty just kind of laughed at him. He didn't really, take him seriously. He wasn't treated like a human being. You kind of see it as, in a weird, twisted way, these scientists are the reason why Homelander has no feelings, why he is such a sociopath, why he cares so little for anybody in his life, why he also wants to be loved so badly. You understand it so well in this episode, and I think they do a great job here of getting you to understand it, but not trying to get you to sympathize. And I think there is a balance there, and I think that they toe that line very well in this episode. And again, just really impressive how they're able to do this without any use of flashbacks whatsoever. I feel like a lesser show would have been reliant on flashbacks, but this show, I mean, you don't really need to do that. You can understand just through these conversations how Homelander's feeling, and I think it honestly, like I said, was more effective that way. But anyway, he has Marty try to jerk off. It doesn't work out, and as a result, he says that if he isn't able to jerk off, he's literally going to burn his dick off, and Marty thinks he's not serious, and Homelander does it, because as we know, Homelander says he's gonna do something, he's gonna fucking do it. And my god, that scene was easily, I think, the best work that scene alone, is probably single-handedly the best work Antony Starr has ever given into this series. Between the maniacal laugh, the way he was straight up taunting Marty, it feels like this is something he's always wanted to do, like this twisted fantasy he's always had in his head, and now he finally gets to kind of, dive into his worst impulses. And and the way everyone is so powerless around him, the control that he is demonstrating here, I mean, oh my god, it was just so terrifying to watch the way that whole thing went down. But then us having this conversation with Barbara, and you would think after all of the torture, all of the, carnage that he has put all of these scientists through in this room, that Barbara would try to reason with him here, that Barbara would try to apologize and own up to what she did. Instead, no, she makes excuses and says, well, we were actually scared of you, and this was done out of fear, and basically blaming him for all these tests that went down and things like that. And you can see just the anger in Homelander, but again, Starr is so good at not showing it. That's the great thing about Homelander, is that you're never able to you're able to tell how he's feeling without him fully expressing how he's feeling. It's the way he conveys his emotion, his expressions, the way he's able to conceal all of that is just so utterly chilling. And the moment when he looks at her and basically tells her that, and she tries to, get him to admit that he could have left at any time he wanted and things like that, and that he always had this power to escape, but he didn't, and that he was just scared to disappoint his parents, which I don't think is necessarily wrong. We know that Homelander, his whole thing is that he's always wanted to be loved in that way. For her to try to justify all of these terrible things that happen to him that clearly has fucked him up so much to the point where now he is trying to get all of the staff to relive it and has made him so devoid of emotions in that way, you can just see how much this absolutely upsets him. And what I like about Homelander is that he doesn't give her the satisfaction of having a quick and easy death. He isn't just going to throw her in an oven. He isn't just going to, laser her. He's going to make her suffer and inflict a slow, painful death on her in the way he hasn't with many other people. Instead, he throws her into what he refers to as the bad room, which is essentially just this white wall. He wants her to know how bad it was, and not only does he, make her stay there, but he essentially has trapped her in there, because if you notice, the door is basically destroyed. There's no way to possibly get in. The whole thing has been pretty much torn apart, and you kind of get the sense that she is going to die there. She's going to die a very regretful and slow death, and it's all courtesy of Homelander. But the ending where he leaves this episode and he's covered in blood and guts, and for the first time all season, he is spouting this huge smile on his face of satisfaction, of feeling like he is in his truest form. My God, what a way to end the episode. I mean, again, Starr just understands this character so incredibly well. He brings layers that lesser actors simply couldn't, and the fact that he hasn't gotten any kind of Emmy attention after, I don't know how you can look at this episode and not think that maybe maybe this needs to be the one. Maybe this is the exception. I know that this is not typically a show that gets a lot of, that it is a huge awards darling in that way. I understand that, but the work he does here, it's undeniable. It is just absolutely phenomenal. The effort he is putting into this show and the way that he is getting you to understand this character and bringing all these different layers to him, but also making you so utterly terrified at every single second. I mean, this is just easily some of the best work we have ever seen from this character. I loved everything that was going on in the storyline, and now I feel like this is going to be Homelander at his most unpredictable. I have no idea what he is going to do now. I mean, we've seen him this season not necessarily be restrained, but be kind of indifferent to everything going on around him, feel this sense of boredom, feel this sense of tiredness, and now he is feeling more sort of pumped than ever. He is feeling that much more fulfilled, and who knows what he could possibly do in this scenario. I have no idea where this is going moving forward, but everything we got with him in this episode I thought was absolutely fantastic. I thought it was so great the way they ended up portraying it. It gave us it gave us that window into his childhood that we really just haven't seen before, and it was every bit as gruesome and every bit as terrifying as we really were hoping for. I absolutely loved everything they did with his plotline in this episode. But I also love seeing the scientists' reaction to all of this. While at first you can see they're terrified, they don't take him seriously at first. They don't think he's actually going to do the things that he is willing to do. Even you have like Marty, who at first, even after seeing Homelander, burn some guy alive, is trying to make it seem like he was like a good friend to him when he knows damn well exactly what he did. So again, I think it's a really great way of kind of seeing how little care Homelander actually has had within his childhood. All the people that were looking after him, they had zero care for him whatsoever, so he has zero remorse for them, and I think that's also why he has so little remorse for most people in his life. That's why he doesn't want to get close to anyone. That's why he doesn't want to open up to anyone. That's why he doesn't have any real redeemable qualities, because he doesn't feel that they are actually going to care for him. He doesn't have time for any of that. And so again, I think it helps you really understand a lot of his motivations are really just kind of put into the forefront here and really get you to further understand a way we haven't been able to see before. So like I said, easily the Homelander stuff I think is the strongest part of this entire episode, and honestly could have been its own episode. It's just that strong, and the moments we get are that memorable to where you could have just had an entire episode of Homelander going on this killing spree and trying to shed his humanity and, getting revenge against the people that turned him into the monster that he is today. And I think that would have been a very strong episode. But there's other plot lines we're dealing with in this episode, and most of them are really good, particularly when it comes to Annie. I love what they're doing with her character this season. I talked about it in the last episode that I really like this reveal with Firecracker, understanding why she's upset with Annie, and I think they do even a really good job in this episode of just continuing to show that Annie is very flawed, and she's made, and sometimes she isn't always going to do the right thing. I like that about her character. We're seeing her kind of get pushed to her breaking point this season, and it doesn't seem like things are going to be resolved anytime soon, because at the start of this episode, Annie is basically being propped up as, because she has like this whole backing and things like that, it is a strong enough backing to boost Singer's anti-Stoop campaign. We know that he wants to try to do what he can to limit Vought's control, limit Soup's, political power. He doesn't really want them to have any sort of power of that kind. He kind of just wants them to be simply entertainers, and he thinks Annie would be sort of a good sort of a good person to promote that, a good way to promote that, and it seems like that she is on board. But then you have Firecracker, who once again is just continuing to ruin Annie's life in any way that she possibly can. But before that happens, we do find out that Butcher has actually been reinstated into the boys, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Mixed feelings about this. Like seeing Butcher with the boys. I don't really love the execution of this, but it's basically everyone's chagrin except maybe Huey. Butcher is back, and MM is convinced that Butcher needs to be there because of just how dangerous Firecracker and Sister Sage are. They need someone like him to try to take them down, but he's not going to be doing it alone. They are making sure that they are assisting him throughout this, and that's basically what happens. Firecracker hosts yet another episode of that show that she's doing, and there's a few things I really like that they do with this plotline. For one, I really love the way, again, they're portraying Firecracker here, who it's revealed in this episode has done some really fucked up shit of her own. We find out through Butcher that she has had sexual relations with a minor, and rather than her try to stop him, she just lets him go ahead, lets it happen. She reveals it to the public, she doesn't bat an eye, and I think what this is really trying to show is that Firecracker knows her audience so incredibly well that she can say whatever she wants to them, and as long as it is somebody that they support, they are not going to bat an eye. They are not going to have any sort of reaction to it whatsoever, and that's exactly what happens when she reveals this. There's no kind of blowback of any kind, and I actually think that's a very startlingly relevant thing. We see this so much where constantly people are, outed for being pedophiles or, being involved in some really shady shit, and nothing really ends up happening to them other than just like a slap on the wrist, and then they just kind of move on, sometimes even less than that. And I think that's what this show is really trying to hone in on. It's like someone who has this audience that is so blindly loyal to them, can literally say and do whatever she wants with very little consequence. And that is a terrifying idea. And I think that's what makes Firecracker such a great character in that way, is that she is so keenly aware of who her audience is, but also just how incredibly loyal they are, but to like a dumb degree, to where there is no reaction to what is going on with her. But then conversely, you have her revealing the stuff about Annie, which is not nearly as bad in comparison. And I really like the idea that when Firecracker does something, or when Homelander does something, they are applauded for it, but then when Annie is revealed to do something, the world is, everyone is reviled, everyone is angered, everyone is turning on her. I think that's a very realistic interpretation of things that we see happen. How many times is someone publicly shamed for something that is not nearly as bad in comparison to what somebody else did, and you kind of see the double standard there. And the things that Firecracker reveals about Annie, especially the first one with her accidentally blinding someone when she was first mastering her abilities, it's not nearly as bad in comparison to literally sleeping with a minor. But that's something that, again, the crowd is so pro Firecracker and so anti-Starlight that she could say the littlest thing and they will be outraged about it. They will have a reaction to it. And I think that part works really well. I don't have any issue with that. What I do take issue with is the idea that this reveal would be so detrimental that nobody would be willing to stick up for Annie in this moment. She's watching this with a crowd of friends, and the second this is revealed, they all give her like this look and they all turn on her, and that part just didn't feel realistic to me. I understand, like I said, the public turning on her, that makes sense. Like, I don't have any issue with that whatsoever. But her friends not reacting to what happened, and again, this is before the other thing that ends up happening with Annie that we'll talk about in a bit, it just didn't really work. That rang very hollow to me. It didn't really feel like it fit. It felt like they really wanted to push Annie to her lowest point in this episode and kind of have her lose everything, but they didn't figure out how to realistically get her there. So that was the one thing they did here that just didn't really work for me. Everything else here, though, I thought was fantastic, because eventually, as Firecracker is going on trashing Annie, she ends up slipping about something that is really just going a few notches too far, just a few notches, and by a few notches I mean literally all of them. I mean, I can't think of anything worse she could have revealed and tried to scrutinize than finding out that Annie actually had an abortion 6 months ago that she tried to keep very private. She didn't really want anyone to know about it, going as far as to literally share her medical records with everybody, and this understandably just sets Annie off. She's done. She's not letting her do this anymore, and she goes in there and she literally beats the shit out of Firecracker, and what an incredible scene this was. I mean, the thing that I love about this especially is that we don't normally get, like, as much as we have seen Annie as Starlight, there hasn't been a lot of scenes of her using her powers, but also fighting. We haven't really seen a lot of that in this show, and this really does show you that Annie is a lot more powerful than we have seen up to this point. And so I really do think this is setting something up with her having this, some kind of bigger fight. I think she's gonna get in on the action at some point. I think we're going to end up seeing that. But yeah, she completely just like goes off on Firecracker here. She's not gonna take this anymore, and this makes things a lot more dicier for Annie. Everyone is now trying to, people that were defending her have now basically turned against her. By the end of this episode, she's completely lost Singer, which, I mean, it makes sense. He doesn't have the backing on his, he doesn't have the Republican backing on his side anymore, so he thinks that his best move is to cut ties with her entirely. And the moment where, she is just not knowing how to process this, especially for her mother, she didn't want her to know about this. She tried to cover this up as much as she could. It's just so incredibly devastating to watch, and I really just don't know what's going to happen for Annie moving forward. Is she going to be able to come back from this? Is she going to be able to win back those people on her side? Or is she going to basically get what she wanted at the beginning of the season, now have it in such a way to where she's lost basically everybody? It's just really sad to see. Obviously Huey still supports her and the boys still support her, but other than that, she doesn't really have anyone on her side right now, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how the storyline ends up playing out moving forward. But yeah, really loving everything they're doing with Annie this season. I think we're really diving deeper into a lot of her insecurities, a lot of her flaws, and by having Firecracker in there, it's presenting this side of her that we just haven't really seen before, and I really love the work that both the show is doing, but also Erin Moriarty, I think, really has just never been better as this character. I love the work she's been doing this season, and this episode really is just such a testament to how great of an actress she is, but also how much range she really does have within her, especially, like I said, on the scene with her just like going ballistic on Firecracker. Just really great stuff with that character overall. Now, the only other major plot line this episode, and then I'll talk about some of the more, like, tertiary stuff that we do get here, it concerns Huey, and I really like the direction they went with him in this episode, where basically he is told that things are really not working out for his father. It's getting to a point where they don't think they can save him. They're going to take him off of life support. His mom has made this decision. Huey obviously is devastated about this, knowing that his father only has a few days left to live, and he sees this as an opportunity to maybe, find a way to save him, and he's going to try to give him Compound V. And the way he's going to do this is by tracking down A-Train, getting A-Train to give him the Compound V, but only does so if A-Train, but does so on the condition that he will forgive A-Train if he does this. And I really like the way this plot line went down. Not only are we seeing Huey again having to reconcile with that idea of forgiveness, but also have to make this really big life-changing decision. Does he really want to have to put his father through this? Does he want him to become a soup? Yes, he's going to save him, but does he also want to physically alter him in a way that could harm him? And I think that conversation that he has with Butcher just really ends up summing it up. I really love that conversation a lot. You can tell that Butcher actually has learned a lot, kind of telling him about how, while it may seem like something that may help him, it's going to hurt him, and he doesn't realize the effect it's going to have. I thought that was just a really great conversation. We also find out that Butcher has taken some Compound V of his own, and there's a moment where he maybe has some kind of powers. I'm not really sure if that's what the show is leaning into, but I think that's what they're getting at, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I really like the way that this ended up playing out, but especially when it came to Huey and A-Train, him having to now deal with this idea of forgiveness. I like the way this episode handled it, because the moment where he was going to tell A-Train to fuck off, he wasn't gonna, give him that satisfaction. I think the reason that he decided to forgive him is because A-Train actually took it seriously. This was not something where A-Train was only going to give it to him if he decided to forgive him. No, A-Train still did a selfless thing and obtained the V20 and obtained the Compound V, knowing full well that this could end up killing him if Homelander finds out. He doesn't really seem to care. He's trying to do good things, and I think Huey just didn't expect that out of him. So I think that's why he was so quick to forgive him in that way. The first time I watched it, I was like, that feels kind of abrupt, but on a rewatch, because I usually watch these episodes twice before I do a review, I really did understand why Huey decided to make that decision, why he ultimately took that leap, and I think this is a really big moment for him. This is really the first time we've seen Huey fully overcome his anger, fully overcome that burden, finally feel like he can move forward. He doesn't have to have this resentment towards A-Train anymore, and I'm looking forward to seeing where is this going to go. Are we going to see A-Train and Huey move closer together? Are we going to see A-Train become a prominent member of the boys? Like, how is this going to play out moving forward? I really do like where they're going with that. But then the ending of this episode, where it seems like Huey is not going to give him the Compound V, it seems like Butcher's gone through, but then we see at the end, his mom comes in, and the Compound V is already there. It's literally in the IV. We see his eyes open, and who knows how this is going to go at this point. What is the effect of this going to be? Is his dad going to turn to a soup, or is this going to have some really negative consequences? Either way, this is a really interesting direction. I'm glad that Simon Pegg is going to be, like, fully back in the show. I just don't know at all where the storyline is going. I'm very intrigued to see how this ends up turning out, but again, really great stuff with Huey this week. Some smaller things to talk about before we get into a more generalized stuff within this episode. We do find out some stuff with Butcher in this episode where he's on his last legs at this point. He knows he's probably gonna die. There's this really great moment with MM where Butcher basically talks about how the only way they're going to be able to save Ryan is by having someone like MM. He wants MM to raise him on his own, and I feel like this is a really great plotline for MM. We've kind of seen him taking this mentorship role of sorts, and, I think this is Butcher, like, fully accepting that, like, he knows how things are going to go. He knows that there isn't repairing things with Ryan. We don't see Ryan we don't actually see Ryan at all in this episode, but I thought that was a really great moment. But the bigger moment to talk about is during this fight with Ezekiel, while Annie is, beating the shit out of Firecracker, you have Ezekiel, who was in Firecracker's trailer, and Butcher's able to fend him off. And it seems like there is some growing, parasite within Butcher that's, giving him, superpowers of some kind and things like that. So is he potentially turning into a soup? I don't know if that is where they are going, but he does talk about how he's taken Compound V before to try to heal his illness, and it hasn't worked, or to heal his sickness, but it hasn't worked. So I don't know what that's all about, but I think this is a really interesting plotline for Butcher, especially as someone who detests soups in the way that he does. How is he going to feel about potentially becoming one permanently? I think that would be a really interesting direction for him overall. We do see some stuff with Frenchie and Kimiko, and I think this episode just kind of solidified that, these are easily the weakest plot lines of the season for me. It's not that I'm not enjoying it, it just, compared to everything else, it isn't quite as interesting. With Frenchie, we get a little bit more of an idea of what Colin really went through, how much this destroyed him, how much his family was destroyed, how he's been really holding this back for a long time, and he's fully opening up to Frenchie, and Frenchie does end up admitting to him that he was the one that ended up killing his family. Colin obviously does not react to this very well, and I don't know where this plotline is going at this point. Now that Frenchie has opened up to Colin and let him know what's happening, and Colin told him that he doesn't want to talk to him again, I just don't know where they're really going with this. I've liked this storyline up to this point, but I really feel like they are going to drag this out, and I'm worried that it's going to get to a point where it just starts to feel repetitive. I think there's a lot more they can do here, but I'm not really sure how that's all going. I think I like the idea of everything they're doing with Frenchie, but Colin as a character just feels so underwritten, and I don't think they've really properly developed this storyline, that at this point I'm just not really sure where this is going to go, and I'm just not really into what they're doing. I liked what we got last week with him having these visions and things like that, and it really the guilt eating away at him. I thought that was good. But now having it where he's told Colin, and Colin reacting in the way that he did, I just don't really know where this is heading at this point, and I just can't really say that I'm that invested in this storyline. So while it kind of had me for a bit, this episode, I think it kind of lost me overall. Then when it comes to Kimiko, I love her character. I love her plotline. Don't get me wrong. It feels so underwritten this season. I feel like every time we cut back to her, it just feels like such a small portion of the episode. And I think something that especially season 2 did really well was further develop her character and dive deeper into, the traumatic stuff with her brother and what the both of them went through, and how estranged they were and things like that. Season 3 diving into her potentially losing her powers, and what she could do if she moves on from the boys. And this season, it just feels like the reason that she has this plotline is so Kimiko has something to do, because as much as I enjoy the moment where she's confessing to Huey that she killed all these men, and now we find out that she did something to hurt this girl. Tala talking about how she was in this, fight club of sorts and things like that, and how she is, blaming Kimiko for it. Again, I'm not that invested in this storyline because I don't think they have given it the proper amount of attention. So it really is the only storyline this season that just isn't fully working for me. And I hate saying that because I love Kimiko as a character. I've loved everything they're doing there. I even enjoy this plotline. I just think it's so incredibly rushed, and it's not even that it's rushed, it just feels like such an afterthought this season. They just needed to give Kimiko something to do, and they put the least amount of effort into this storyline, so I'm just not super invested in what's going on there. I hope it goes in a direction where it starts to get a bit more focused, but right now it's the one storyline where I just feel very underwhelmed with what they're doing with her character overall. But then just a couple other plot lines going on within the world of Vought. First of all, talking more about A-Train in this episode, there is a moment where he ends up taking the vial of the Compound V, and he's caught by Ashley. And I think we, again, really just see how much Ashley is affected by her basically being demoted and being treated more like this mascot of sorts from Homelander, to where she doesn't pay it any mind. She recognizes that A-Train's doing this, and she's actually okay with it. And we find out that she is, trying to get her revenge in her own way. Basically just, I think from what they implied, like, she shit in the toilet, but she didn't flush it, and that was her way of, like, getting her revenge. A very Ashley thing to do in that way. But I think this is hinting at the idea of, like, these two potentially teaming up, and I think that's a really interesting plotline if that's really where they're going. The two of them have this common enemy now in Homelander, and kind of seeing how they've both been wrong. They're both kind of coming to the realization that, they are not valued. They are, they both are kind of being disregarded. I think this is such an interesting idea to see. We haven't seen a lot of interactions just between, like, the two of them before. And so the idea of these two teaming up and potentially going against Homelander, I don't know if they're going to be successful, but I think this is moving us closer in the direction of more and more people veering away from Homelander, and how hard it's going to be to really take him down. But people who have a personal vendetta against him, is this something that the boys are going to latch onto? We know wants to flip A-Train. Is he gonna start to also recognize that Ashley is also in the mix? I don't know how that's all going to play out moving forward, but we will have to see. But once again, aside from Homelander, the most interesting stuff in this episode with Vought does, of course, involve Sister Sage, who we don't get a ton of her in this episode, but the big thing is that, one, everything that happens with Firecracker here, with this, like, 6-hour event that she's a part of, exposing Starlight, is pretty much all engineered by Sister Sage. She is on this crusade, she knows the Firecracker's on this crusade to destroy Annie's image. She herself wants to be a part of that. So again, we're really seeing how she kind of has her toes dipped into every single pot. But the big stuff is with the Deep, who we find out that basically, this episode confirms what I suspected, that when she is around the Deep, when she is her normal self, she's repulsed by him. She's not attracted to him at all. She doesn't like the idea of them being romantically entangled in any way. But whenever she, lobotomizes herself, it kind of gives her this chance to just relax and have fun, and she has to continually do this in an effort to feel like she doesn't have to constantly be bombarded by her smarts. Like, she can finally take a step back, and I think what they're doing a really good job with is showing how much of a burden this actually is for her. The idea of her being the smartest person in the room, it means that she's always thinking about something. She never really has a time to cool down, and we see, because of that, she is able to, she finds pleasure in, for just a couple, just for a little bit, not having to feel that intelligence, not having to let that define her, and just be a regular person, even if it's just for a brief moment. And so I think this is a really great idea. I love the way that whole scene played out. I didn't love seeing him stick a needle in her eye. That was pretty gnarly to watch and kind of gross, but I really like this development. Again, I'm wondering, is this genuine for Sister Sage? Does she actually have some sort of feelings for the Deep? Or again, is this her just completely just using him? I don't know how this is all going to play out moving forward, but I like that we now have confirmation that, yes, she does temporarily lobotomize herself just to feel pleasure, just to feel happiness. And I think that's a really, like, sad and deranged idea that's, like, pure the boys, but also, again, it really adds dimensions to Sister Sage. She doesn't like the fact that she is the smartest person in the world. She wishes that she didn't have that smarts within her, but because she is, it doesn't even have that much of an effect. Her brain is constantly like regrowing in that way, and we kind of hear about that in this episode where her brain, even when she lobotomized herself, it grows back very quickly, so she's never really able to just let loose and have fun, and we kind of see in this episode how much of a detriment that is for her. So I think that's such an interesting idea, and again, I just continue to love the work they're doing with her as a character this season. So a lot of stuff to talk about here. I think the big thing to really take away with this episode from the directing is just how much things are setting into motion. I think the first 3 episodes did a good job of kind of table setting things, but this episode, really just gets us to understand what the plot lines of this season are going to be. What are we really dealing with here? Kind of having that through line of just everyone kind of reconciling with their past, but also trying to dive deeper into the, takedown of Homelander. We're slowly seeing those chess pieces being set up, now having A-Train and Ashley on this side, now having them sort of maybe swing over to the boys, having Sister Sage, and now, revealing how, the machinations of what she's doing. We still don't know her deeper plan and things like that. I still think she's here to infiltrate VOD and just destroy it from inside out. I think that's still very much her plan. But I think that we just see how much she is kind of pulling the strings at this point, and now having this Homelander that has completely shed his humanity, is he going to be willing to hold back? Is he going to be willing to just let her continue to take the reins? I think he is really regretting appointing her to this position. I think he really is regretting recruiting her in the first place, because she has completely stole any sort of agency that he really had at this point, and I don't really know how that whole dynamic is going to play out, but I think that's going to be so compelling to watch how that all ends up going down. When it comes to Annie, how is she really going to deal with the fallout from all of this? That's something that I'm really intrigued to see, how that's all going down. I think, like I said, the directing, they're doing a good, Huey, him having to deal with, both forgiving A-Train, but also now the consequences of, kind of his actions, because he still was the one that obtained the Compound V. That was his decision, but was that something his mom already had in mind? I don't know what's really going on there. So again, I think the direction is just really strong this episode. The writing, I think, for the most part, was also really good, particularly the Homelander side of things was incredible here. Everything they were doing with Annie, and, diving deeper into both of those characters and presenting new sides to them that we haven't seen before. And then with Huey, kind of the path that he's going on, I really like as well. But also when it comes to Butcher, who I will say is really my only flaw with this episode, aside from what I said with Annie. I just feel like Butcher is being put on the back burner too much this season. I understand that obviously he is not as, on top of things because he's dealing with his health, but also trying to deal with Ryan. But that does not mean that his character arc his character development should be sacrificed. And I'm sorry, but having recruit Butcher to the boys when the last time we saw these two, they had this really intense sort of confrontation where it seemed like the two of them were just going to part ways entirely and just kind of give up on their friendship. And now seeing come to the realization that they need Butcher back just isn't satisfying storytelling. How did this happen? How did come to this realization? Why is he suddenly recruiting Butcher back? What made him change his mind? We haven't seen any of that, other than maybe the idea that he just realized that the Butcher was a valuable asset. But I feel like that friendship is far too important to not see the scene of those two reconciling. They made such a big deal out of it in episode 2. I don't understand why they just immediately switched gears in this episode. It feels like there was a scene that was missing here, and especially if there was and they didn't air it, I don't understand why they did. So I can't even imagine that they filmed the scene, because I figured they would have put it in the episode. But yeah, it's literally just not here, and that feels very unlike what we've seen with The Boys before. I feel like The Boys is always a show that, aside, despite all the wild and crazy shit that goes on, really does put the characters first. And this was a rare misstep, I think, in terms of something that we really should have gotten more of. And the fact that we didn't was definitely a pretty big disappointment for me. So I think that was definitely something that held things back. But other than that, I think the writing was really on par here. I'm not feeling the same connection, like I said, to Kimiko or Frenchie's storylines, just because I don't think they're getting enough focus this season. We're really giving most of the focus here to like Sister Sage and Homelander and Huey and the mission that the boys are going on. That really seems to be the focus here. Some of the other storylines are kind of getting lost in the shuffle, and I'm worried this season is going to feel a bit too convoluted by the end, and I don't know if they're going to be able to wrap up every single plotline in a satisfying manner. But I like the way things are being set up, and I think the writing for the most part was really great here. I think even in terms of, again, the satire, I thought was also just really on point in this episode. One of the funniest moments for me is seeing the Deep and Firecracker do this duet, and it seems like it's like this big publicized event, everyone's eating it up, but then you pan away and you see it's this really small gathering with a very minute crowd that doesn't really seem to be reacting to this very much at all. I thought that was such a funny reveal. Again, just really shows like the performative nature of Vought that we continue to see, but also again just how pathetic so much of this really is, despite the fact that Firecracker has this crowd, you know, on her side. A lot of it we kind of see in this episode is because of just kind of how stupid they are, how willing they are to buy into any of her bullshit, and I think we really do see that here. So I think stuff like that, I mean, again, they are just really nailing so well this season. I think there were so many great moments here. From an action perspective, I mean, this episode, I think, really did end up delivering, whether it was the fight between Annie and Firecracker, the fight between Butcher and Ezekiel, but of course, also all the mayhem that Homelander was causing. I mean, if you want to have an episode that just really utilizes the cinematography and action side of things, I think this was just a really strong one. Visual storytelling, also a really big component, particularly in the Homelander storyline. Something I didn't touch upon at first is the dolphin cake he ends up giving to them by the end of the episode is also completely destroyed, so it really is showing Homelander fully shedding that side of him. Any personal connection he had to this lab, it's gone by the end of the episode. He's now reconciled, you know, he's now faces inner demons, and the way he's done that is literally just destroying every trace of, you know, it is literally just destroying every single person that wronged him, and you know, slaughtering them, and you know, hacking them to bits, and now having Barbara, you know, literally stand alongside a pile of bodies. I mean, again, just so much striking imagery in this episode. I thought they did a great job in terms of cinematography. I love the score in this episode as well, and like I said, I think the pacing was good for the most part, but sometimes it did feel a little bit off. But overall, I mean, I'm still really loving this season. I really like the direction things are heading. We're now at the halfway point, and I really think things are going to start to ratchet up. I think we're going to have some really intense moments coming, and I'm just really excited to see how the rest of the season does end up playing out. I think, again, the way they're diving into everyone dealing with their past, everyone trying, you know, people kind of, other characters kind of contemplating their role within either the Seven or the boys. I think there's some really great stuff going on there. So overall, really did enjoy this episode. At many points, I think was the best episode of the season, but again, there were a couple things that did hold it back. But overall, I still really did love this one. I am going to give this week's episode of The Boys, Season 4, Episode 4, Wisdom of the Ages, an A-. Over, guys, in my review of this episode of The Boys. Most guys saw this episode overall, left your thoughts in it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye. Don't worry about your laundry.